Okay, if you're a gardener, you definitely know this feeling. The season's over, your beautiful plants have done their thing, and now you're just left with all these pots of old, tired soil. What do you even do with it? Do you just chuck it, try to compost it? It's a real puzzle. But here's the thing. What if that soil isn't actually done? What if it's just waiting for its ultimate comeback story? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into. So, is your old potting soil really dead? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? And the answer, which might surprise you, is a big no a lot of the time. It might look totally exhausted and worn out, but with a little bit of know-how, you can bring it roaring back to life, ready for a brand new season of amazing plants. Let's break down the evidence. You can literally see the difference. Over on the left, you've got that spent soil. See how it's all compacted and pale? Sometimes you'll even get this white, crusty layer of salt on the surface. Here's the kicker. It becomes hydrophobic. That's a fancy way of saying it actually repels water. You pour water on it, and it just rolls right off instead of sinking in. Now, look at the soil on the right. That's the good stuff. It's dark, it's fluffy, it's just begging for a drink. And trust me, these aren't just looks. This is the difference between a thriving home for your plants and, well, a plant graveyard. All right, so here's our game plan for this soil resurrection. First, we'll look at the problem itself. Then, we'll give our soil a little health checkup. After that, it's time for a full detox and cleanse. Then, we'll tackle any nasty pathogens with a bit of heat. And finally, the fun part, rebuilding the perfect mix from the ground up. Okay, let's start with the big why. I mean, why bother with all this? Isn't it just easier to go out and buy a fresh bag of potting mix every spring? And yeah, it might seem that way, but there's some really, really good reasons not to. So the case for bringing your soil back is pretty solid. For one, it's way better for the environment. Think of all that horticultural waste we can avoid. And let's be real, it saves you a good chunk of change over time. But to be a soil saver, you first have to understand the enemy. It really all boils down to three main ways your soil breaks down: chemically, biologically, and physically. All right, before we jump into any treatments, we've got to play doctor. Time for a diagnosis. We need to figure out if this soil is a good candidate for rehab or if it's, time to call it and let it go peacefully into the compost bin. This little chart here is basically your decision-making guide. So let's say the plants in this pot had a known disease, something nasty like root rot. That's a high-risk situation. You're going to have to either go for an aggressive sterilization or just say goodbye. Now, if you see that heavy white or yellow salt crust we talked about, that's more of a moderate risk. It's salvageable, but it's going to need a serious deep clean. But on the other hand, if your plants were perfectly healthy and just lived out their happy lives, you're in the low-risk zone. You are good to go for the full restoration process. Okay, so let's assume your soil got a clean bill of health. Awesome. Now it's time for the first step in its recovery, a total detox. We're going to flush out all the gunk that's built up and check on its basic chemistry. This whole process is called leaching, and it sounds technical, but it's really just giving your soil a super deep rinse. It's so important. Why? Well, every time you fertilize, tiny salt crystals get left behind. Over a whole season, they build up and create this toxic environment that literally starts pulling water back out of your plant's roots. It's like reverse watering. So the fix is simple. Make sure your pot has good drainage, fill it all the way up with water, and let it drain out completely. You want to repeat that a few times. The general rule is to use about 4 times the pot's volume in water. Don't forget to scrape any visible salt off the pot itself, too. All right, next up is a fun little kitchen chemistry experiment. We're going to test the pH. Now, pH is a huge deal for plants because it's like a gatekeeper. It controls which nutrients the plant can actually absorb, and you can get a pretty good idea of your soil's pH with stuff you already have. Just grab a soil sample and add some vinegar. If it fizzes, your soil's on the alkaline side. No fizz? Okay, try a new sample with a little distilled water and baking soda. If that fizzes, you've got acidic soil. And if nothing happens either time, you're probably sitting pretty in that neutral sweet spot. This is great info to have for when we start rebuilding the mix. So, we've dealt with the chemical detox. Now we've got to think about biological threats, the invisible stuff. The best way to think about this next step is that we're basically giving the soil a controlled fever, just hot enough to wipe out any nasty diseases, unwanted pest eggs, or stubborn weed seeds that might be hanging around. Now, this is a really, really important distinction. Our goal here is pasteurization, not sterilization. And here's the difference. Think of pasteurization as a targeted antibiotic that takes out the bad guys. Sterilization, on the other hand, is like dropping a nuclear bomb. It kills everything, good and bad. We want to heat the soil just enough, say around 140 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 minutes, to kill the harmful stuff but leave some of the beneficial microbes behind. Because if you create a totally sterile, empty soil, it's just a blank slate, and you better believe the first bad guy that comes along will move right in and take over. So how do you actually do this? You've got a few options depending on how much soil you're working with. For smaller batches, you can totally just bake it in your oven or even zap it in the microwave. A little heads up though, baking soil in the oven, it can make your kitchen smell very earthy. If you've got a ton of soil, solarization is an amazing option. You basically just use the power of the sun under a sheet of clear plastic. It's super low effort, but it does take a bit of patience, like 6 to 10 weeks. All right, we have done the hard work. We've detoxed it, we've disinfected it. Now it's time for the best part, the grand finale. We're going to rebuild this soil and make it even better than it was brand new. This is where we add all the good stuff back in. Think of these as the building blocks for your perfect soil. First up, perlite. This stuff is basically puffed volcanic glass, and its whole job is to keep the soil light and fluffy and full of air. Then you've got aged compost. This is the main course, bringing back all the essential nutrients and organic matter. And my personal favorite, worm castings. This is like a probiotic shot for your soil, reintroducing all that amazing microbial life that helps your plants eat. And here is the recipe for your brand new, supercharged potting mix. You start with that soil you just cleaned and pasteurized. Then, you're going to mix in about 20 to 30% aged compost for nutrition. Add in about 10 to 20% perlite to keep things airy. Then, a good scoop of worm castings, maybe 5 to 10% to bring that biology back online. And for the finishing touch, mix in a good, slow-release fertilizer according to the package directions. That'll give your new plants food right out of the gate. You know, this quote here really sums it all up perfectly. Success hinges on a vigilance that begins with comprehensive assessment and ends with procedural cleanliness. It sounds formal, but it just means you got to be careful and thorough from start to finish. It starts with figuring out if your soil is even worth saving, and it ends with making sure your pots, your tools, everything is clean so you don't just reinfect your beautiful new soil. It's a whole system, really. So there you have it. Your old potting soil isn't garbage. It's a resource, just waiting for a second chance. By following these steps, assessing, cleansing, pasteurizing, and rebuilding, you can create an absolutely premium potting mix for practically free. It's ready for a whole new generation of happy plants. So the only real question is, now that you've got this incredible reborn soil, what are you going to grow first?